Hi, folks. Welcome back. Here we are with our next recorded lecture. I am your professor, Professor Guerra. And last time, right, we were looking at utilitarianism and what Jeremy Bentham as well as John Stuart Mill had to say about that. Of course, we started off with the wonderful trolley problem, and you folks decided for yourself what you would do. If you decide to save the 5 people, then you're thinking like a utilitarian. However, we saw that utilitarianism is pretty demanding, right? You can't favor yourself if you were the one person tied to the track, and you can't favor your loved ones if your loved one was the one person tied to the track as well. With that said, we're going to go ahead and begin with a different thought experiment today, and we're going to go into Kant deontology. Let me go ahead and start this up. I'm going to go ahead and shrink my face, put myself here in the corner, and here we go. So here is the wanderer problem. You are a great surgeon, a remarkably great surgeon. There are 5 people in the hospital, each of whom needs an organ in order to survive, or else they die within the week. It just so happens that an innocent wanderer has arrived for a checkup in the hospital, which the receptionist notifies you has no family. You'll learn that the wanderer is tissue compatible with all the people who need the organs, and that you could cut them up and distribute the wanderer's parts among the 5 who need them. Doing so would guarantee the survival of the 5, but nearly certainly result in the death of the wanderer. If you ask them, the wanderer does not consent to the operation. You don't know the identity of these people. Again, without the organs, the 5 people will die guaranteed. If you harvest the organs from the wanderer, they will nearly certainly die. Talking about like a 90 to 99% chance that they're going to die. The question is, according to John Stuart Mill and utilitarianism, would it be permissible to perform the operation without the wanderer's consent? Do you agree with Mill? Why or why not? Now, go ahead and pause this, think about it, and come back. So, chances are a lot of you folks are looking at this and thinking, what type of messed up nightmare scenario is this? Who came up with this? You're probably thinking that, no, it's not okay to harvest that person's organs. It's not okay, you probably think. However, what would Mill say? And secondly, if you said that in the trolley problem, it's okay to kill the 1 to save the 5, my question to you is, what makes this any different? I'm not saying they aren't different, but what makes them different? What makes them morally different? Now then, sometimes people say that in this situation, they don't give consent, while in the other situation, consent's not a factor. But notice that's not really how consent works, right? In the trolley problem, no one gives consent to die. Just because someone can't say no doesn't mean you have access to their body. If someone were to be passed out at a party and they couldn't say no, don't touch my body, that doesn't mean you have access to their body. That definitely doesn't mean you have access to kill them and sacrifice them. So in this situation, the wanderer doesn't give consent. And the trolley problem, the 1 person doesn't give consent either. Sometimes people say that the difference is that in the other one, in the trolley problem, you're not killing them, it's the trolley. And this one, you're the one killing them because you're holding the knife. But notice that's a bit of a weak argument, right? You're still killing them, whether you're pulling the lever or you're killing them with the knife itself. In both instances, there is a tool. Why does it matter if the tool brings you up close and personal or far away? If it mattered, right, if being far away from the victim mattered, then we will be able to kill people so long as we were sufficiently far away from them. We will be able to kill anyone so long as we were sufficiently far away from them. Think of like a drone strike in the Middle East. That would be seen as maybe okay because all you're really doing is pushing a button. So what is the moral difference? I'll leave that up to you to decide. As we're going to see with Kant's deontology, he doesn't think there's a difference at all between the situations. He's going to say killing the wanderer and killing the 1 person is murder in both situations. So with that said, let's go ahead and start learning who Immanuel Kant is. So he was a German philosopher. He was a very religious man. He was very Protestant. And he was concerned at the time between the debate between rationalism and empiricism. Now, this was an epistemological debate. The rationalist said that you know what you know because of your rationality, because of your reason. That's how we get to real or true knowledge. Empiricists, on the other hand, were more, I guess you could say, scientific. They said that you know what you know due to evidence and observation. Now, he was also dissatisfied with consequentialist theories like utilitarianism. Why? Because the greatest happiness principle always required empirical knowledge first. Go back to the trolley problem. If the 5 people tied to the track are rapists, pedophiles, people that spread a lot of misery, people that spread a lot of pain in the world, and the one person is a philanthropist, maybe they're a saint, maybe they're a very selfless person that spreads a lot of happiness, then that's relevant information that you would take into account as a utilitarian. If that was the case, then yeah, you would choose to kill the 5 because they spread no happiness, they spread no pleasure, they spread no pleasure, they spread pain. But Immanuel Kant doesn't really like that. He wants to be able to know what's right and good and what the right thing to do is without knowing really any of the details of the situation, which is a very tall order. Chances are a lot of you folks, when you decide what's right or wrong, you always want to get as many details and information as possible. Immanuel Kant's going in the other direction. He's saying, I don't want to know anything about the details. I want to be able to get a rule, a principle that will tell me what the right thing to do is and not have to get bogged down by the details. Let's see if you can do that. So deontology, right? When we talk about ethics in the West, often we consider utilitarianism and deontology to be the 2 big camps or the great ethical debate. We looked at utilitarianism. Let's go ahead and break down the word deontology. It comes from the Greek word deon, meaning duty, so it's the study of one's duty. Now, it's not consequentialist based at all. You're not trying to promote a certain consequence. Instead, you're just trying to do your duty, trying to do, in a sense, your job, your moral job. Now, duty can come from a lot of different places. If we look at, for instance, Chinese philosophy, if we look at the Chinese philosopher Mengzi, he says that duty comes from our moral impulses, and we got to grow those moral impulses. If we look at the Chinese philosopher Shunzi, he believes that our duty comes from the law, that humans are actually not great people, and we need to impose legality and laws onto them, and that's how we get our duty and fulfill our duty, by listening to these external laws. However, as we're going to see in just a moment, with Kant's deontology, our duty is not going to come from inside, like our emotions, our moral impulses. It's not going to come from outside us either. It's going to come from our reason, he's going to say. The important thing to note right now is that in utilitarianism, the ends are more important than the means. The ends justify the means. But in deontology, the action itself determines whether the ends can be justifiably pursued. So this is a science fiction example that gets thrown out a lot in mainstream popular culture. Suppose you have a time machine, you go back in time, and you can kill baby Hitler in their crib. Kill baby Adolf Hitler from Nazi Germany. Utilitarianism would say, well, murdering a baby, infanticide's pretty gnarly, pretty bad, but if it promotes good consequences, if it helps save lives during the Holocaust, yeah, you should probably do it. Now, deontology, however, is going to say, don't worry about the consequences when it comes to your moral actions. You need to look at the action itself, infanticide, murder. And that itself is going to determine whether you can even promote or pursue the consequences of, preventing the Holocaust or something like that, right? So how do we figure out what our duty is, according to Kant? Well, we got to look at our reason in order to get what he calls to a categorical imperative. Imperative is a fancy way of saying order. Categorical is a fancy way of saying absolute. So the categorical imperative is going to be our absolute order that we always have to do. But in order to understand what that is, first we need to understand hypothetical imperatives. So hypothetical imperatives can sometimes be conditional imperatives. And we can start off by first looking at conditional or hypothetical questions. So a conditional question is, if this condition is met, if these things happen, then what would you do? Sometimes my wife gives me conditional questions or hypothetical questions, right? She'll say something along the lines of, as we're getting ready to go to bed, she'll say, hey, Victor, if you bumped into your ex-girlfriend, then what would you do? Silly things like that. She's silly like that. But that will be an example of a hypothetical or conditional question. Now, a hypothetical imperative basically says that if those conditions, if that hypothetical is met, then you should or must do whatever. So, in my example with my wife asking me if I met my ex-girlfriend or I bumped into my ex-girlfriend, what would I do? The hypothetical imperative I tell her would be that I would ignore her, say that I never, say that I don't like her, she means nothing to me, and that I'm happily married or something like that, right? That would be the hypothetical imperative. If those conditions were met, then you should or must do ABC. Now, Kant tells us, if the action is good only as a means to something else, then the imperative is hypothetical. If your order to do something is only good because it's trying to promote XYZ, then the imperative, the order, the thing that you're doing will only ever be hypothetical. It'll never be absolute. It'll never be a categorical order. So, in other words, he says, if you want happiness, pleasure, X, then you should do A. That type of imperative is always going to be hypothetical according to Kant, because it always follows the condition or the form of, if this condition is met, then do this. And that, he says, is a big problem with utilitarianism, that it only ever gives you hypothetical imperatives. The action, the thing that you should do, is never good in and of itself, but always in relation to some other goal, or always in relation to some other condition that is met first. And he doesn't like that. He doesn't like that because what is good for one situation may be bad in another situation. Suppose that, we were in the classroom and we wanted to celebrate and order pizza. And suppose that I took a poll and 51% of people said they like pineapple on pizza. So I order pineapple on the pizza. But then 3 more people show up after I make the order, or 4 or 5 people more show up after I make the order, and they hate pineapple on pizza. So now 51% or more of the people don't like pineapple on pizza. So the thing I did in the past, ordering pineapple on pizza, was good before because more people wanted it. But now that more people showed up, that same action indexed to a different time is now morally wrong. He doesn't like that. He doesn't like that one bit. He wants to be able to get to a categorical imperative, something that's going to be good, not for happiness, because if you don't care about happiness or pleasure, utilitarianism doesn't mean anything to you. And he wants to be able to get a categorical imperative that will always be right, no matter the conditions, no matter the time. It's objectively necessary in and of itself without reference to any purpose or any other end. That's going to be a categorical imperative. A tall order. So let's go ahead and see what he thinks that is. So here's the first formulation. He tells us this: act as if your maxim of your action were to become by your will a universal law of nature. Or in other words, act only on a maxim, a rule that can be universalized. That sounds really funky. Chances are you're looking at that and saying, what does that mean? Don't worry, I'm going to help you explain it. A maxim is a fancy way of saying a rule. It's a very specific type of rule according to Kant. A maxim specifies what action to undertake, under what conditions, and for what purpose. We can come up with an infinite number of maxims. I can come up with some right now, for instance. I will wash the dishes when the sink piles up, under those conditions, for the purpose of having a clean home, right? Clean kitchen. Here's another maxim. I will take my dog out. That's the action. When they are scratching the door, condition, for the purpose of letting them go pee, go urinate or defecate or poop or whatever, right? Again, you can come up with some yourself as well. To universalize a maxim means that everyone will act on that rule, that maxim, every time under those conditions and for that purpose. So, in order to see if a maxim, a rule that specifies those 3 things, can indeed be universalized, it needs to pass 2 tests. 2 tests. The first test is you have to be able to imagine it existing in the world without there being a contradiction, a logical contradiction. And the second one is you must be able to personally will it in your heart without contradiction. But okay, with that said, let's go ahead and pause here for today, folks. We're going to go ahead and continue with Kant next time. But until then, I'll see you. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time. That's what I'm trying to say. Bye-bye.